Anais and I will moderate the first part of today's session, in which we will talk about unrecognized vulnerable groups. And then, after a very short break, Sergio, Marlis, and Marie will introduce the Engage Right to Energy toolkit. But first, before starting, I would like to acknowledge the great work or amazing Luisa is doing with the graphing recordings. Here you can see date one graphic recording which we discussed what is energy and what is important, with very different answers from people with different backgrounds and perspectives. Then, in day two, we had a nice interactive session on basic minimum energy service needs. How can we define them? Who must guarantee that everyone has access to basic minimum energy needs? And who must pay for that? And last, yesterday, we went through the right to energy, water, and energy coalition. And right, this is the graphic recording of yesterday's session. But today we want to go a little beyond that. No, we want to give a voice to those unrecognized vulnerable groups who are minoritized by energy poverty indicator and policies. These include people experiencing deep forms of energy poverty or precarity due to structural forms of discrimination, such as people living in informal housing and with irregular connection, homeless persons, and people of ethnic minority backgrounds. Some of them we will present through our four speakers today, who will answer four main questions. Who are the invisible energy precarity groups in their view? What needs to be done? What are the barriers to achieve what needs to be done? And how can we overcome those barriers? But we also want to know about your thoughts and answers. And for that, we kindly ask you to answer this question by using the microphone. Those pictures, links to video, good practices, and so on are very welcome. And of course, please contribute to the discussion, writing your question in the chat box. Also, I would like to highlight the nice library that we have in our platform, where you can insert your links, videos, whatever you like to share. It's really easy. And this library will be available after the event. So take advantage of that. In the end, we would like to invite you on the bar, because this session will be too exciting and full of new insight for only 1 hour. So join us, because obviously we don't have drinks, but we will have a good music and even a Spanish table to talk, to discuss about La Cañada Real, a very nice case study here in Spain.
Thanks, Raúl, for the introduction. We will begin our session with a video of a testimonial of a neighbor affected by energy precarity. Maribeth is a neighbor from the north area of Granada, one of the largest cities in the south of Spain, that has kindly shared her lived experience of energy precarity through the video. We want also to acknowledge the Association for Human Rights of Andalusia that facilitated the video process. The Association for Human Rights of Andalusia, they cannot, they wouldn't be able to be here to discuss with us, but we want to thank them for their facilitation process and also to acknowledge their work developing several projects related to energy precarious situations in the territory.
Mi nombre es Maripaz Muñoz, soy vecina de Molino Nuevo y deciros que a raíz de unos 4 o 5 años estamos sufriendo toda la barriada, cortes a diario, más de 8 horas, incluso días enteros y sobre todo se va agravando en las olas de frío y en las olas de calor en verano. Deciros que en verano, cuando hubo una ola de calor, estábamos prácticamente todo el día, completamente todo, y 2 días seguidos o 3 sin suministro. Mi pareja fue para que corriera el aire porque esto era agobiante. Fue al baño y abrió una ventana que tenemos en el baño que es plegable y nada, falló, se le cayó encima, perdió el conocimiento durante 15 minutos. Tuvimos que ir a urgencias, en fin, los problemas que nos va en el invierno, pues muchísimo frío, mis piernas necesitan calor porque si no me duelen muchísimo. En plena ola de frío nos cortan la luz 3 o 4 días seguidos, aparte que a diario son 5 o 6 cortes al día y apenas tenemos suministro 3 o 4 o 5 horas o 2 horas, depende. Y nada, que mi silla apenas puedo cargarla. Cuando es un día o 2 días sin suministro, la silla eléctrica no la podemos cargar, ni puedo salir a hacer compras o hacer alguna gestión, o pues si ocurre algo urgente tampoco podría salir de la casa. Es decir, que esto es una situación muy agobiante porque es a diario, lo estamos sufriendo. Hay gente que estamos pagando la luz, estamos llamando, nos dicen que los técnicos están en la zona arreglando, se tiran 8 o 9 horas y no vienen cuando quieren ni ponen el fusible. Es deciros que es una situación muy incómoda, muy insoportable, antihumano, porque te sientes impotente, te sientes como manipulada, como un régimen que nos están manipulando, no tienes derecho. Una cosa es básica, que es para vivir, y eso nos lo están negando. Es deciros que es una situación muy incómoda. Y incluso hasta nuestra salud se está agravando porque ya te pones de mal humor, te sientes impotente, todos los días son iguales, no puedes poner lavadora, no puedes hacer de comer, te pasas los días aquí en confinamiento en 4 paredes sentado a oscuras, echando mano a recursos que no teníamos antes, como una estufa de butano, comprar botellas o comprar lámparas o velas. Muy pésimo porque nuestra salud se está notando, pasamos frío y cuando hace calor, pues muchísima calor. Nada, que al que le corresponda esto, que por favor queremos ponerle voz a nuestro problema y que nos escuche.
So it's a very shocking video. But let's start with the first speaker we have today. He's Thomas. He works on the Association of North Rhine-Westphalia, which provides personal and individual advice services. In particular, for the last 8 years, the association has run a project which aims to address energy poverty, offering legal and budget advisory services free of charge to people suffering from either energy poverty or energy cuts. So please, Thomas.
Okay, thank you very much, Raúl, and thank you to give me the opportunity to speak here. Well, first, let me give you a short overview. You see the red marked area. This is North Rhine-Westphalia. And just to give you a little background, there are lots of power cuts each year in Germany, about 300,000 power cuts and 30,000 cuts of gas supply every year. And right now, we do not know the amount of the last year with the impacts of Corona. And we will see how many power cuts there have been last year. And furthermore, we cannot say how many people exactly are suffering from a power cut. Of course, we have, and there are some legal protection provisions, but their protective function is not that high. And in general, main reasons for energy poverty are low income, high energy cost and consumption. Maybe you know Germany has the second highest energy costs in Europe. And there are often further aggravating factors like unemployment, diseases, divorces, language problems, or indebtedness. And you can already see that affected are especially vulnerable households, which I'm going to represent today. And we try to help these households by offering free legal and budget advice services regarding energy debt and power cuts. This includes the regulation of arrears to secure the future supply with energy. And of course, we also noticed certain precarious situations and could identify some precarious groups. And I have chosen 3 of them to present them exemplary today. Yes, one precarious group are asylum seekers who are faced with several problems. This includes, for example, difficult situations from a legal point of view, because asylum seekers are not allowed to work until there is a final decision concerning the application. And that is why they do not have a legal claim for some important social benefits, which would be definitely necessary. And besides, we noticed some problems when the people move into an own apartment and leave the collective accommodation. Because at that point, they have to take care on all the things about energy supply alone. And sometimes there's a lack of knowledge about the systematic of energy supply. There are some payment failures maybe, and it is quite difficult. And another problem we often identify as asylum seekers are confronted with highly questionable business practices. For example, some people come and say, hey, look at my extremely cheap conditions of this power supply contract. And this leads to the fact that these people have contracts which are indeed very expensive. And sometimes they concluded 2, 3, or 4 contracts, which is, of course, absolutely unnecessary. And another precarious groups we identified are former homeless people who used to live on the street. When they finally found a flat, it is often in very poor condition. Sometimes there is no heating possibility at all, and sometimes the gas heater is officially closed down because it must not be operated for security reasons anymore. That happens when it's very, very old and old-fashioned. It must not be operated anymore. And besides, some of these flats do not have an electricity meter or a gas meter, but for homeless people, or for former homeless people, it could be very, very difficult to find an energy provider who is willing to install a new meter, because there are often some credit assessments made by the energy providers, and these assessments are not that good, of course. And yes, furthermore, we had some consultations of former homeless people who have been absolutely emotionally overtaxed with taking care about housing and all the necessary steps concerning. And of course, that makes it very hard to ensure the permanent supply with energy. And the third group and the last group I'm going to present today are ill people in general, or people who are addicted to drugs. There are, maybe you know, there are many stereotypes, and nearly everybody who seeks advice feels some kind of shame first. And in consulting practice, we often notice that these people are very, very sensitive. And if there's something that does not work straight away, they give up. And in some cases, they have given up for years. For example, we had one advice seeker who lived 15 years in a flat without any energy, without gas for 15 years. I cannot imagine how it must be to live like this. So now, of course, the question is what could be done? And in order to help these precarious groups adequately, there are targeted and multilingual consulting opportunities necessary. And from my point of view, it's very useful to offer an outreach work directly on site, for example, in drug counseling or institutions who offer, who distribute food to the poor people. And multiple problems. Said to the official, they see
Hi, Thomas. This is Clemens from the tech team. I think maybe someone can confirm in the chat, but I think we couldn't hear you very well anymore in the last few seconds.
No, I can't.
Yeah, so the last 15 seconds were a bit chopped, the audio. So maybe you could try switching off your video, and then we'll see if your audio works.
Is it better now without the video?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Yeah, I
Okay.
hear you.
Okay. And I'm sorry if you didn't understand me. Take a little look. Yes, and just let me repeat, in most cases, the providers are quite insightful and declare a payment deadline extension or show some other goodwill towards the people. And now coming back to one of the main questions of the sessions, I can say, no, I do not really recognize a political discrimination. It's rather a look away in general. Because in Germany there is almost no political initiative and there is no profound examination or monitoring concerning energy poverty. And thus the country does not fulfill the requirements from the European Union, by the way. And now at the end, please allow me to show one more slide with from my point of view, with one of the most powerful measures against energy poverty. It's a regional network that takes all welfare organizations with points of contact to the issue of energy poverty into account. I will show you. You see, because tackling energy poverty means that we have to think about all the precarious groups we will hear today, and a stable and a far-reaching network with clear structure and with a clear structure of reference can include all these groups. And regular communication with all these institutions helps to raise the problem awareness, because energy poverty is not an isolated topic and cannot be solved alone, of course. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope it was okay with the sound, and I hope you could understand everything. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me in the following.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, it has been everything nice. We solved those technical problems, and yeah, we have time later not to discuss. And please provide your question to Thomas in the chat. Has been insightful, no? How we need to consider the life circumstance of a certain group, no? I like that how you mentioned that we need collaboration. We need to involve people in this process to engage them. So let's see what has to say our next speaker, Freek. He has been the director of FEANTSA, the European Federation of National Organizations, working with homeless since 2001. FEANTSA is the only major European network that focuses exclusively on homelessness at European level. Please, Freek, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Raúl. Do you hear me all?
Yes.
Yes, okay, that's a good start. I will make a short presentation and try to address the issue of energy precarious groups from a housing perspective. And in 10 minutes, of course, difficult to go into much depth. So it will probably be a little bit superficial, but I hope that the message gets across. First of all, if you look at the data on energy poverty that are collected at EU level through the EU Silk survey, you will see that the latest data show that 18%, so almost 1 in 5 of the poor households cannot afford to keep their house adequately warm. Now, that's already quite a high number, but you have to understand that EU Silk, the EU Silk survey, is not a very inclusive survey. So all the people that live in institutions, like for instance, homeless people living in shelter, are not even captured by this survey. And it's clear that a lot of people living in collective accommodation, like shelter, that these collective accommodations are actually notoriously energy inefficient. And even if they don't directly pay the price of that, the cost of that is still paid somewhere. So I think one of the groups that are probably overlooked when we talk about energy poverty are the people living in collective forms of accommodation, such as shelter for homeless people, for instance. If you look at the EU policies and the EU funding going to address energy poverty, most of the attention goes to people living in social housing. And that's good, of course, like that's positive. I think that is especially because the social housing sector is very well organized and can function as a sort of intermediary to reach out to people that are on low incomes. But I guess that there is other groups which don't have these intermediaries, which gets overlooked to some extent by policymakers addressing energy poverty. And I think there is three from a housing perspective. It's the tenants, poor tenants living in the private rental market. A lot of the poverty is concentrated in the private rental market in a number of countries. Second group is the group of the very poor homeowners. There is homeowners that live in absolutely deplorable housing conditions, which are also energy inefficient. And then I think, and they cover to some extent the two previous groups, is the people living in what we call in my organization or in our sector, the people living in cold homes. These are people that are not energy poor in the sense that they don't use the energy. So they are in a precarious energy situation, but they don't spend much money on energy because they don't have the money, so they live in cold homes. So I think these three groups get too little attention in general. Now, the three other questions you wanted me to answer is what needs to be done, and another question I want to answer them in one go. I think what should underpin our actions is that we need to live up to the right to housing, that we have to respect the right to housing. Now, it's very interesting that if you read comment number 4, UN comment number 4 on, I'm not going into detail, but it explains what the right to housing actually is and what are the different aspects of the right to housing. It's very clearly stipulated that policies should not be should not bring already vulnerable groups into even a worse situation at the expense of that the policy should not should not benefit already advantaged social groups at the expense of others. And sometimes I have the impression that the climate policies actually do that. Now, in general terms, what needs to be done, and sorry to be superficial, I think we first of all need to better target the scarce resources, scarce public resources to the most vulnerable. And secondly, we need to better monitor the impact of the use of these scarce resources, especially the social impact. I think there's a lot of assumptions being made about the social impact, but little evidence that the social impact is actually realized. And more in detail, I think we need to have a slightly more sophisticated understanding of how the cost-benefit argument underpinning the case for energy-efficient renovation of building, how that works. In simplistic terms, or in simple terms, what is argued is that the cost of renovating your house to make it energy efficient is compensated by the savings on your energy bill. And that's true. That's true for quite a number of people, but not not always for poor people, and certainly not always for very poor people. Especially because that kind of cost-benefit argument works in two times. Like the cost of the renovations come immediately, but the financial benefits is spread over a longer period of time. And very poor households might actually not have the time to benefit financially. And you could say that that could be resolved by making loans available, but very poor households might not have the loan or the borrowing capacity. And then that argument that the cost of renovations are compensated by a decline in the energy cost doesn't work for the group that I mentioned earlier on, which is the people living in very cold homes. For them, energy renovation is only a cost and not a financial benefit. And so what we call for also at EU level is the creation of a cold homes fund, so that these people can also benefit from energy renovation, even if they don't benefit financially because they don't use or only use very little energy. And secondly, to reach these groups, I think we also need to have some more creativity in the financial tools that we want to use. Because even if these people living in cold homes don't benefit financially by a reduction of the energy bill, they benefit hugely from the renovation of their houses in health terms. And maybe there is a way to financialize, to capture the cost or the financial benefits in terms of health that these households experience. But in general, I would say that you cannot address energy poverty without taking into account the impact on housing at an individual level and the wider housing dynamics. Often you hear that social and environment are mutually reinforcing dimensions. It's probably often true, but it's certainly not always true in the housing area. Certainly not if you focus on the most vulnerable. And we are actually quite worried that the current developments in the area of climate and energy in general might increase what we call renovictions. You know, that people get evicted from the housing because of the increased rent or the cost housing. And that comes on top of an already expected spike in eviction because of the current economic crisis we're going through. So I think we have to be a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more fine in our analysis on how energy renovation, energy efficiency renovation, energy retrofitting impacts on the poorest households. And I would like to end with a few words on the EU policies that are in place and that we find quite worrying. And I said it yesterday also at the seminar, at the webinar organized by Pascal Confin, the member of the European Parliament. There is reasons to worry. First of all, because the responsible commissioner, Commissioner Timmermans, seems to not fully understand how the Green Deal policies might impact on the most vulnerable. When he launched the EU renovation wave a couple of months ago, he said, and maybe it was a slip of the tongue, but he said literally that some people choose to live in unhealthy and squalid housing conditions because they want to avoid a rent hike. And that should be stopped because these people actually make it impossible to reach the climate goals. Like if that thinking is present at the highest level, there is good reason to be worried. And there is a number of EU initiatives that are currently being prepared. There is the idea of extending the ETS to building sector. There is work on minimum standards for energy efficiency in the existing housing stock. All these kind of things are welcome from a climate perspective, but we have to make sure that there is sufficient social safeguards. And the last thing, because I see I have to stop, is that the Just Transition Fund of the European Union was there to actually compensate for some of the negative social impact of the climate interventions. But this fund has been slashed recently. That's a reason to be worried. And what is left seems to be targeted more to the employment consequences of the climate interventions rather than to the housing interventions. And that is probably something that needs to change. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Freek. Thank you for your speak. And it's nice to see how you highlighted, especially the Green Deal, and the energy efficiency regulation, to improve the building of more vulnerable people. Especially when yesterday that was one of the solution, or one of the speakers advocated for improving energy efficiency of most vulnerable people, not to address energy poverty. So I think we can discuss later this a little bit more. And even I can propose a table in the bar with the name of Green Deal to discuss this much more. I think that could be nice. But now we are going with our third speaker, Josep. He's member of the Alliance Against Energy Poverty, a social movement based in Barcelona, which is primarily composed of families who suffer energy poverty, advocate energy rights, and struggle against big energy companies in Spain. Please, Josep, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Raúl will help me with my slides. So if you can put the first one. First, I will start by apologizing for two reasons. The first one, for my English level, which is very poor, and I'm sorry for destroying this beautiful language. And the second one, for stretching the topic of discussion of this session a little bit and trying to get to the point that I want to. That is that public policies to tackle energy poverty usually are created without counting or without asking to the people who know more about them. And these people are the people who are suffering energy poverty, these vulnerable groups. So I will try to share with you why some of the major politics in Spain to tackle energy poverty are done from big offices in the government buildings with without knowing the reality in the streets. So if you want to pass to the next slide, please. I will start with an example, which is the Spanish thermal social bonus. In Spain, we have a social bonus addressed to electricity bills, which is a discount between the 25 and 40% of the bill. So there is no discount in gas bills. So the thing that the government created was this thermal social bonus. In the end, it consists in an annual payment between 25 and 123 euros, and it varies depending on the climate zone that you are living. So, which is the clue here? It is automatic, this social bonus? Well, yes, in some cases, and these cases are the ones who have a direct debit bill. You know, the one that for the people who have the electric social bonus and their bills are connected to their bank account. So they receive this payment automatically. But what's the situation in Spain? That there are a large number of people who pay their bills in the post offices. So these people are not paid automatically with this social bonus. And they must achieve like a very large bureaucracy method in order to get to this payment. So in the end, you have like a correct measure that with bureaucracy is limited and you don't arrive to the people that you want to arrive. And this is an example of, if you can pass to the next slide, a reference that I like to use in my presentations, that is that public policies addressed to tackle energy poverty are like enlightened despotism, which, you know, it's like some kind of political ideology that appeared between the 18th and the 19th century. In the end, it was based upon the principles of the Enlightenment, so it was like some kind of change in that time. One of the most representative kings is the Emperor Joseph II, and this is the motto and what guides also most of the politics addressed to tackle energy poverty, which is everything for the people, nothing by the people. This is the clue here. So if you can pass to the next slide, please. Thing is that to change some things, you must know the context in which you are working. And this is only achieved by counting with the people who are suffering it. So, for example, in Spain, there is a difference between regulated market and the free market. These are like the tariffs that are regulated by the state and free tariffs that you choose with your company. The people who work in this matter, we know the difference between these, but 77% of the population don't know the difference between one market and the other. 64% of the Spanish population don't know the tariff that they have contracted. And in the end, the social bonus, which is like the great measure to tackle energy poverty, is unknown for the 30% of the Spanish population. So in the end, if you can pass to the next slide, which is like some tips that are connected with everything I said before, is that first, empowerment. This is the key to everything, because we know that this kind of discussion is the key of this kind of discussion always is the knowledge, and the knowledge to change things. So we must carry on policies that are addressed in order to empower the people and to let the people know their rights. The second tip that I would like to share with you is the importance of reducing the bureaucracy, which is one of the main problems of the Spanish regulation to tackle energy poverty. So in every space that is possible, it is better to approve automatic measures. Third, this is like some kind of measure that has been, and I don't know if it's created, but at least it was imposed in Barcelona, which is which are the energy advice points, which are public and local offices, in order to do some kind of, I don't know, for example, to improve your energy bills, to solve problems with the energy companies. And it is not the person who must go to the company office, but it can be done by this kind of offices that offer this kind of advice. Fourth, what we were talking before, it is crucial that participation is improved. It is not just this kind of participation which we have now, for example, in Spain, that when there is some kind of law, there is a month in order to send to the government your comments and nothing else. There must be stable forums for citizen participation, and that these forums are also integrated by people who suffer the problems, not only by so-called experts. And the last one, because the first points were only addressed, or basically addressed, to the administration, but there is one thing that we can do from this day, and we can do it, all the people that we are here in this forum, is to integrate vulnerable groups in our organizations, and not only that they are some kind of users of our organizations, but also integrate them because their knowledge is too powerful, and it is better to count on them and to count on their expertise in order to improve the public policies. This image that you see here is an example of our collective assessments, which take place in Barcelona every 2 weeks, and there are spaces when we do, or we give advice to people with problems with energy supplies. And the clue here is that the advice is not given, as I said, by experts, but the people who suffered before these problems. They empower themselves, and then they are able to give the advice at least better than the so-called experts, because they have lived the situation, and they do how to communicate and how to express what they feel better than anyone. So if you can pass to the last slide, it's just the context of our organization. I work in Enginyeria sense Fronteres, but I also participate in the Alliance Against Energy Poverty, and I will be well, it will be great to answer for your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josep. Thank you for your presentation. It's quite. I like your statement. Everything for the people, nothing by the people. Insightful statement, through which is again highlighted the importance of prioritizing citizen participation, and specifically most vulnerable groups, to improve policies. Please ask your question here through the chat, and we will have later time for the discussion, and also use the microphone in which you can collect all your thoughts here. Okay, and we go now with the last speaker. I'm quite happy to have them here, because I know that the situation sometimes can be difficult to take part in this kind of events. We have Laura Gil and Inés Cedrón. They are working in the coordination team of the Secretariado Gitano Foundation in La Cañada Real, in Spain, Madrid. They aim to promote social, educational, and labor inclusion of the Roman population in La Cañada Real. In this framework, They collaborate with citizens, social actors, administration on the definition of effective and fair solutions through community participation and engagement. Please, Inés, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Raúl, and good afternoon, and thank you for having us. We will present today the situation of electricity cuts in the largest European settlement, La Cañada Real, which is located in Madrid, causing the deprivation of the right to a basic service to more than 800 families since October last year, affecting about 1,800 minors. The Commission for Attention to Vulnerable Groups defines them. Hold on a second, please. It's here to make the presentation, and here you go. The Commission for Attention to Vulnerable Groups define them as a person or group that, due to its age, sex, marital status, educational level, ethnic origin, etc., prevents them from accessing conditions of well-being. There is a debate whether we should refer to vulnerable groups or violated groups. The situation we see in Cañada Real is a clear violation of rights, as there's been a cut in the power supply now for 6 months. The situation is extremely complex, as multiple difficulties converge in the spheres of housing, environment, infrastructure, mobility, services, and basic resources, but also in the health, employment, or education situation of the population, as well as their ethnic diversity and of origin. This complexity has been used as the excuse delaying a proper response from the public administrations with competencies on those matters. The high vulnerability in Cañada Real can be described as follows: high prevalence of substandard residential conditions or even houses built with waste materials, the so-called shacks. Residential segregation, meaning physically segregated spaces and remote areas without public transportation. Lack or serious deterioration of basic infrastructures, as, for example, drinking water, lighting, sewerage, paving, telephone and digital communications, etc. But also environmental risks to the health of the population due to the presence of incinerators, power stations, oil pipelines, etc. Very high unemployment rates, low education level, reproducing the cycle of poverty for younger generations. But also strong social rejection, stigmatization of the population linked to crime, poverty, and exclusion, and the lack of access or directly absence of resources and basic public services. La Cañada Real is an informal city that ranks along 16 kilometers in the autonomous community of Madrid. Land occupations over the last 60 years have been transforming this space, creating an authentic linear city and plan composed of irregular buildings of a very diverse nature, but very stable, as families have been living there for many decades. La Cañada is characterized by its great cultural diversity as its socioeconomic and residential heterogeneity. The barriers in terms of resources, infrastructures, and equipment are the following. There are no public, private, or subsidized resources for education, employment, or health within this territory. There are no basic facilities for leisure and free time as well. There is a lack of water, several illegal hookups along the 16 kilometers, creating very risky spots. The current regulation framework of the Cañada is the regional pact signed in 2017 by all the relevant public administrations and guarantees the participation of all stakeholders involved to reach out for solutions through a permanent work structure. But at present, we find that there is not enough political will for the development of the regional pact. This agreement requires an economic investment as well as changes in the legal framework to advance in the legalization of the dwellings that will remain and could have an electricity contract or develop the electricity lines required. The different administrations have the responsibility of guaranteeing the regional pact as well as the structures that compose them. The administrative complexity found in Cañada is very high, as the territory depends administratively on 3 municipalities and 1 autonomous administration with different political parties offering a very diverse approach to the issues. Fundación Secretariado Gitano is a social non-profit entity working at national level and has been working in Cañada Real for more than 10 years, in coordination with the rest of the social entities engaged in the settlement. To address the problems generated by power outage, we have advocate on the different social platforms, mass media, disseminated publications, generate dialogue spaces with political leaders and the local and with political leaders at the local and regional levels. Specifically, we are focusing on restoring electricity, as it is a clear violation of rights and with very negative consequences on education, social, economic, health situation of the population. We have also been supporting the neighborhood associations and their actions. We have been coordinated with educational centers and community health spaces affecting this population. We have been also meeting with the Roma population living there in order to include their perspective and ensuring their participation in reports, mobilizations, in media articles and news. This situation has been denounced nationally and internationally. And you can see in the slide a list of relevant stakeholders denouncing this situation. The successive power cuts that have been taking place in sectors 5 and 6 specifically of Cañada Real are having, as I was saying, a huge impact on the people who suffer them, affecting many of their fundamental rights. First of all, the assistance to educational centers. This situation is making it very difficult to keep up with school rhythm for children due to the struggle of doing homework, studying at home, going clean to schools, having clean clothes, directly affecting attendance at the centers and the educational process as a whole. But this is also preventing minors from attending classes online. This specifically affects those in high school or other trainings with online classes due to the pandemic. Other consequences of the deprivation of electricity supply on living conditions and health can be defined as follows. For example, current power outage are also affecting the living conditions and the physical and mental health of the people who suffer from them. Most of the homes do not have generators, so they cannot use any electrical appliance as refrigerators, washing machines, heater, boilers for hot water, etc. In the middle of a pandemic that requires extreme hygiene measures and after one of the toughest weather phenomena with temperatures below -20 degrees in Madrid. That's what happened at the end of January, February. There are also situations of maximum anxiety affecting mental health and with psychosocial repercussions. There is also an extreme risk to the health of the elderly population, given that there are people who need to be connected to oxygen pumps or minors who require these kind of devices as well or need to be fed by tubes, which without electricity is not being possible. At present, there are several possible solutions placed on the different debate tables. First of all, cut illicit hookups that supply illegal plantations and improving surveillance to prevent additional illegal connections. A proposal for alternative power lines by Naturgy. Declare an emergency situation and supply households with other types of generators. I need one minute more, Raúl. Activation of a study group on the legislation that need to be modified, including the different political groups of the Madrid Assembly. Prepare an action plan to give a specific response adapted to different situations. And also improvement of basic infrastructure and equipment to ensure decent living conditions. As a conclusion, poverty is present in many parts of La Cañada. For over 60 years, public administrations allowed the development of a linear city without roads, without supplies, which currently cause a situation of extremely difficult solution now. A proposal that seeks solutions in the current legal framework has a difficult fit in La Cañada. It needs to mark a pathway approaching each theme and setting a calendar, which houses are going to remain, and the corresponding urban measures needed, along with the incorporation of services such as electricity, sewerage, together with temporary and palliative measures of a social emergency situation. This cannot be tolerated in a developed country such as Spain, in one of the richest regions, in a state that has signed the Charter of Children's Rights, the European Charter of Social Rights, various treaties of human rights, but has been blind before the situation of 4,000 people, 1,800 minors without their basic needs covered. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Laura and Inés for being here today and sharing with us. No? This presentation is shocking. Yes, it's shocking the situation there in which more than 1,800 minors do not have electricity since October 2020. This is a difficult situation, as you highlight. It's not only not the right to energy, but to adequate housing, which has also a crucial impact on their right to health, food, water, sanitation, and education. This is quite interesting. I would like have the discussion now further. Remember also that we have a specific table in the bar later to talk about La Cañada Real, which is possible to speak in Spanish. Also, feel free to join. It's quite. I would like to have that question about this is a lack of social justice. Who must protect the fundamental human rights of these people? This is something that we can start not to discuss now.
Thank you, Raúl. And thank you all of the speakers for your interventions. Now I will try to wrap up some of the questions that have been written down in the chat. Because we still have a few minutes left to discuss, so let's take advantage of it. And well, I'm going to try to wrap up all the questions at once and present them. Maybe some of the people, maybe they want to ask this question directly. And then the speakers can respond to all of them. Okay. So I think that for Thomas, there were two questions. One from Catherine and one from Emma. Maybe Catherine or Emma, do you want to ask the speakers directly? If not, I can read the questions.
No, thank you very much. It's not necessary to do this now if it takes too much time, but I think there was quite an interest in this network, and the question was simply to Thomas to elaborate on it. What exactly is it?
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, and I think that your question was very similar to Catherine's one, so maybe we can move to the question that was for Freek. I think that it was yours too, if you want to to ask him directly, or if not, I can read it. Okay, so Freek, Emma asked in the chat a direct question for you regarding what do you propose to do at the UA level to properly tackle the issue. And I think that the issue referred also to the reduced feeding policies discussion that is started. And finally, for Josep, there is another question regarding his perspective or his point of view on the right-to-energy approach in Spain. So maybe we can start.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, for example, Freek, the word is yours. You can start. It's great.
Yes, it's difficult if you approach energy poverty as fundamentally a housing issue, because the European Union will tell you that housing is not a competence of the European Union, therefore nothing can be done. But I think at least what can be done is in the areas where the European Union can legislate, and energy and the new Green Deal, etc., allows for that, to make sure that what is decided doesn't negatively impact on the affordability of housing and doesn't make the housing situation of the most vulnerable groups even more difficult than it is at the moment. So I think it's probably more of a negative approach, but to avoid that the initiatives to make sure that we can address the climate challenges don't make the situation of the most vulnerable people, don't have the negative consequences, negative social consequences on the most vulnerable people. So I know it's not very concrete, but I also know that it's not sufficiently happening at European level. And concretely, I think the Just Transition Fund that I mentioned very quickly earlier on, like the fact that that has been slashed, not by the Commission had a decent proposal, but by the Council of Ministers, maybe that should be put back into question. And also the fact that most of that money is earmarked to help the employment consequences of the Green New Deal. It's mostly to help people working, for instance, in the coal industry to find other jobs and reskill themselves. That's all important. But to use especially housing challenges faced by the most vulnerable, that is that's useful. We suggest to have an EU cold homes fund. That could be a proposal. And maybe the third thing that I would say, there is these new initiatives that are called the New European Bauhaus and the Affordable Housing Initiatives. These are initiatives that are very much framed in the environmental work that the European Union is doing. I think that since these initiatives are very new, that the Commission can still make sure that there is the right balance between affordability and environmental housing affordability and environmental objectives, that the balance could be ensured there. So these are tiny things, but there is certainly room for improvement.
Thank you very much. Maybe Thomas or Josep, do you want to respond to questions that were for you? Okay, Josep is here.
Yeah, very, very quickly. Okay, the question was something like, how can we approach the right to energy in Spain? But I think that it is something that can be approached in every European country and every world country. And the first point for me is that it's just stopping the cuts. This is, for me, the basic clue of everything. Okay, we cannot accept that in the 21st century, there's still people who cannot have an energy supply if they cannot pay their bills. This is totally unacceptable. So every measure must be in this way, is avoiding cuts. Okay, so first, you ban the cuts. Here, for example, in Catalonia, we carried out some kind of law, which was carried out by a popular legislative initiative. And we force the companies that before every cut they must ask the local social services about the situation of the family, and if the family is vulnerable, the cut must not be done. So it is simpler. It is as simple as that. It's just avoiding cuts, and then from an ideological perspective, we can discuss who assumes the cost of that. But first, avoiding cuts for me is the first clue of everything.
Thank you, Josep. And Thomas, if you want to respond to the last question. I don't know if he's having connection issues. No, he's here.
Yes, I will try with my camera again, and if it's not working, please tell me immediately and I will switch it off again. I think there were 2 or 3 questions concerning the network I have shown, and I was asked to say a little bit more about this, and I think to answer the structure of the project is quite important, because right now we have the consultations in 10 cities in North Rhine-Westphalia, and therefore we have 10 consultants. So every consultant is very, very well networked in the city and in a steady contact with the energy provider, social services, but also with other welfare organizations. And for example, if there is an advice seeker coming to us with an unexplainable high energy consumption, we call the energy counseling and ask, could you check what's going on in this flat? And sometimes there are people with incredible high debt, and we cannot solve it, we cannot regulate it, and therefore we have to go to the debt counseling and ask, here's somebody who needs help, please take care about him. And therefore we always try to establish this kind of network in every city.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. I think to end a last minute question, I would like to ask Inés about the situation in La Cañada. If there is any human rights case being developed in court on this issue there in La Cañada, what is the situation there? Please.
Yes, okay. I would like to answer two questions that were in the chat. One is, Anaïs, you were saying that there are several neighborhoods with a similar situation, and yes, and also we collaborate with another organizations and different NGOs working in those neighborhoods. In fact, in February, I think we sent several legal procedures we started in order to jointly address this issue. And it's true that there are several similar situations, but the fact is that in Cañada there are 8,000 people, and that is a huge number of people, and there are 1,800 minors. I mean, this situation cannot be looked aside, of course. And the other thing is, from our perspective, is a human rights issue, definitely. I mean, it's a basic right that should be covered by public administrations, and we are working on different lines of legal procedures. So we are exploring or developing different vías. There are certain pathways that we had to comply at national level, and also so we can move forward to international level. We are working on them, but we are finding a lot of resistance at judiciary level. It's not been easy. We have been dropped down one of the cases that we presented, so it's not been easy. and with many public administrations involved, and the company with very supported by the public administration. So it's not easy.
Okay, thank you. I think we can discuss later in the bar in that specific table. Before to end and go through a very short break, we can look in the graphing recording as in previous days is very nice and amazing the work Luisa is doing. So you can see here the 4 different questions. People with low incomes, refugees also there. What are the barriers? How can we overcome them? Participation and integration is over there. Collaboration, networks, meeting. So this is so far the half of the session. We are going to a very short break, and we are coming back.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. First of all, thanks a lot. Thank you, Anaïs and Raúl, for all these and all the speakers from this first part of the session on invisible precarious groups. It's been really fascinating to listen to all of them, and yeah, lots of interesting experiences and ideas there. So my name is Sergio Tirado. I am a research fellow at the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And I will chair the second part of this session, which is somehow unrelated to this first part that just finished, that Anaïs and Raúl were co-chairing. And that will revolve around the right to energy toolkit. So in addition to being, as my role as research fellow at Autonomous University of Barcelona, I'm also co-leading the working group 3 of the Engager network, that, as you know, is the this cost action, this network of energy poverty researchers and practitioners that has organized this wonderful forum. So what I'm going to present here today is ongoing work. This is by far not an end product. Sometime last year, in 2020, the working group 3 of the Engager network decided to do a work on collaborative toolkits on the right to energy. The idea is to produce some sort of a 20-page professionally edited document in which we try to respond some very basic questions about the right to energy, namely, what is the right to energy? Who has a right to energy, and how can it be put into practice? And while even if I am the one presenting these slides now, this is the result of ongoing work in which there's a whole editorial team where, in addition to myself, Marlies Hesselman, Marin Cornelis, and Marilyn Smith are also part of, plus some more than or around 20 colleagues of the Engager network, some of whom are here with us today. I mean, I've seen Slavica, Inigo, Giovanni, Umberto, Roberto. So it's great that you're here. I'm hoping that what I'm going to present, what I'm presenting does justice to the work that we are doing. Before going on, I would perhaps suggest that if you have any questions, ideas, comments as I am presenting, you may want to type them on the chat. And perhaps I could ask my colleagues, Marin or Marlies, to share the Miro board of the one we are using throughout the whole forum, because we've created a space there. You will find it under day 4, in which we would ask you to provide your comments, ideas, especially examples, practical examples of stuff that we will talk about in a minute. Because that could be very useful feedback for the work we have ahead of us And we will, in addition to that, we will have a few minutes afterwards in which there will be, we will give you the opportunity to give us your comments, your feedback on the Miro board as well after my presentation and a Q&A. So, because it is aimed at providing answers rather than questions. So it's not, we are not aiming at the very academic, we are not aiming at an academic document. We want the document that helps all sorts of audiences, but primarily non-academic stakeholders to engage with the energy poverty through the concept and language of right to energy. So it's more about giving people some certainties, not opening new debates, but trying to summarize what we know about the right to energy so far, and illustrate that with as many practical examples as possible. And we've decided to, in order to appeal to any potential reader out there, we've organized the toolkit around these three main questions: what is the right to energy, who has the right to energy, and how to put it into practice. And that's how this presentation is organized. So the right to energy is, and this is coming very clearly from the discussions in the forum, is not about energy as such, but as the services it provides. And in this way, in this regard, we are relying on very recent work published by two of our contributors, colleagues from the Engagement Network, Giovanni Frigo and Umberto Ciao. We are looking at this from a capabilities approach. And the understanding that the right to energy is the right to achieve necessary energy services for people to have their freedom to achieve what they value doing, and also to reach and conserve human dignity. There's this tension that energy uses, energy services are very much dependent on local and cultural conditions, but we think that this capabilities approach allows us to make some sort of very general, universal definition about the right to energy. And of course, energy services refers to what we all know that they are. In bit of a comment on the notion of access. One, there is the physical lack of access to the supply, which is being able to connect to the electricity grid or not being disconnected, and more in general, access to energy services, which include all other elements such as affordability. Yeah. Hoping that the slide will show. Sorry. Okay. So the idea is that everyone should have access to a minimum amount of energy services for personal and material social needs. Well, that's a very crude way of approaching this idea of minimum levels of access is through a minimum energy supply calculations, such as, for instance, the International Energy Agency in 2020 estimated that a household with a standard appliance in a sort of global north context would need 1,250 kilowatt hour for attaining the what could be like material and social needs that are understood as are essential needs. But then these calculations become very tricky because they may depend on people's needs, such as, for instance, the elderly spend much more time at home, they move less, therefore their energy needs are different, are higher, or the energy efficiency of the home and appliances. Alternatively, what you could do as well is to look at minimum required energy service levels. And in the same way, for instance, the World Health Organization, in relation to the right to health, includes a list of essential medicines. The World Health Organization also has guidelines on minimum indoor temperatures, which is the very well-known 18-degree threshold, or air pollution guidelines for indoor stoves. So that's a different way of approaching this minimum level of access. And then there is the element of affordability. In this idea of access to necessary energy services. And a key kind of proposition from the right to energy is that access to necessary energy services cannot be dependent on people's inability to pay for the energy services. That's something that Josep made very very clearly made a statement on just a few minutes ago. It cannot be that people that cannot pay for the energy they need, they are without energy. And affordability also means that that's a very important clarification, not jeopardizing the realization of other rights referred to essential needs. That is, a household should not be faced with a heat or eat dilemma, because a person's human rights is a bundle of interrelated rights, all of which are equally important. Another commentary on the issue of affordability is that it is not only about low energy prices. Of course, the way to make energy affordable can be through regulated tariffs, social tariffs, free energy bands, and the such. But then there are other income support or energy efficiency measures, or even regulatory measures aimed that, for instance, ensure that vulnerable households, all households, have the best possible tariff and supply contract that they need. Yeah. In regard to the legal basis of the right to energy, it doesn't exist as such in international human rights treaties, and that's different, for instance, from the right to water. But there are many other related rights, namely the right to housing. I would highlight this one as that can provide the legal framework that supports claims based on the right to energy. In fact, the right to energy is seen as derived from other basic rights, such as the right to housing. And for its fulfillment, it requires procedural rights, such as the right to information, the right to participate in decision-making, access to justice. So what happens when someone thinks that her rights have been are not being respected? Well, there needs to be these other procedural rights to help them overcome this situation. That's an important element of the legal framework as well. So coming into the second question of the toolkit. So who has a right to energy? Because we're approaching the right to energy from an international human rights perspective, in which the universality of human rights is paramount. We may say that this sort of right to access necessary energy services must be granted to all individuals and groups. There's a bit of a critique. I'm not an expert at all in international law, but there is a bit of a critique that the human rights perspective is giving too much importance to the individual, whereas kind of collective understanding of rights may be more suited to non-Western contexts. So that's why we also included this in the draft that we have here. But that's, in any case, what the international human rights perspective underlines is the need to have every single person being a subject of right and therefore entitled to have access to necessary energy services. But that all of us are entitled to it doesn't mean that we cannot recognize differences among individuals and groups. And therefore, right to energy, action motivated by right to energy principles needs to recognize people in a position of vulnerability, for instance, because of physical conditions, age, sickness, disability, or those that are experiencing discrimination due to ethnicity, gender, class, income, housing status. The case of Cañada is very clearly a case of discrimination in which a whole population of 8,000 people are being discriminated because they are irregularly occupying their dwellings. So there needs to be specific action restoring the rights for these people need to be prioritized. And among these various axes of inequality, the gender dimension is probably the most important axis of inequality is highlighted. Yeah. So third question, how to put the right to energy into practice? And I must say that we are looking at this from a rather Eurocentric perspective, because all of us who are contributing to this toolkit are from Europe, and that's the context we are familiar with. So there's a limitation there in the context. Sorry, in the scope of the toolkit, but nevertheless, before going into specific kind of ways of implementing the right to energy, a few words about the governance and policy dimensions, in the sense that the right to energy calls for a reframing of energy provision under a perspective that emphasizes energy as a precondition for people's dignity and freedom of choice. And I think there's this tension between energy as a commodity and energy as an essential need or service that is important here. And from an international human rights perspective, it is important to define who has the duty to ensure that rights are respected, protected, and fulfilled. And typically, the state, as regulator of energy markets, and they have a very important role. They have the duty to make sure that rights are respected. Of course, there are other elements such as energy democracy and participation. And speaking of minimum energy service level, we have examples in which participatory processes, in which ordinary people deliberate about what necessary energy service can give us an example. There is this reference by Gordon Walker and collaborators from 2016. That is a very nice example of that. In specific contexts, such as the UK in this example, how can energy uses be defined? And there is scope for that sort of participatory processes. But there is also scope for bottom-up participatory lawmaking. The Catalan law of 2014-2015 that Josep Babot has referred to previously, it is a great example of how people's voices can be directly brought into lawmaking through a people's legislative initiative. And of course, transparency, data, and accountability of the energy sector are important elements as well. In terms of implementation and practical solutions, what often comes, what we've seen in our reviews, that defining minimum energy service levels is an often cited approach to implementing the right to energy. So setting a minimum amount of energy supply is such as a number of kilowatt hour per year for electricity. That could be one way. And there are examples of these calculations. Our colleague Roberto Varela, who's with us today, they've done such an exercise with a sample of vulnerable households, and they found that they were systematically under-consuming. So their real electricity consumption was below what their calculations said that should be a minimum electricity supply level, demonstrating that these sort of approaches could be helpful in achieving this sort of minimum consumption levels. Then we could also think of minimum energy service, not supply levels. And again, our colleague Íñigo Antepara, well, he told us about this experience of the social landlord Alokabide in the Basque Country, in which this social housing company guarantees for free a minimum temperature of 18 degrees indoor temperatures in 126 low-income households of a pilot project. And that's not about kilowatt hour, but it's about the actual service being guaranteed. Then disconnection bans in the European context are extremely important, and a statement based on the proposition based on the right to energy would say that disconnection should not be left at the discretion of commercial providers. But the state can have a role in regulating and restricting and avoiding vulnerable people being disconnected because they cannot pay. Of course, you can also rethink. I mean, these are basically energy poverty measures, but what we are trying to do here, and that's still work in progress, trying to rethink energy poverty mitigation measures from a right to energy perspective. And of course, energy affordability measures such as social tariffs, they've been largely discussed. But something that happens, a difference between the social tariff between Spain and Portugal can illustrate the importance of making this type of support measures as efficient and as universal as possible, in the sense that the Spanish social tariff, the electricity tariff, is only benefiting those vulnerable households that apply for it, actively apply for it. We made some calculations and think that below less than half of those who have the right to apply for, who are eligible to apply for the social electricity tariff in Spain, actually got it. And we've seen that also with the social thermal bonus. The counter example would be Portugal, in which there is an automatically applied social electricity tariff that every eligible household will receive, and it is the government the one responsible for making sure they have the information. Tax authorities, they have information about income, and they tell the electricity providers which households are eligible, and therefore they get this rebate. They don't have to apply for it. So we think that's an interesting example of how right to energy principles can be applied to energy affordability support measures. Then energy efficiency can be there's a need to rethink energy efficiency measures as well. And we've seen, I mean, that's all very well known. We've seen that vulnerable low-income households are likely to not benefit from these kind of financing schemes. And there are a few examples in which this has been tackled. I would highlight here the Papillon project from Flanders. This is a case study highlighted at the European Energy Poverty Observatory, in which low-income, like very vulnerable households, have access to a wisely devised rental system to very highly efficient appliances, such as, for instance, fridges or washing machines. And last but not least, even though we've said that the state is the main institution, the main bearer of responsibility for the implementation of a right to energy, there is space for other sort of entities to be active in this space. And we think especially civil society organizations are, they are very active, and actually they are leading the way in right to energy debates in Europe. I would say, I mean, we have the Right to Energy Coalition based in Brussels. We had Marta Myers yesterday speaking here. And another nice example, I think, is the Alliance Against Energy Poverty in Catalonia, that Josep was representing today here, Josep Babot, in which they are actively working to have domestic water energy to be recognized as a human right. But they can also provide direct material support, filling the gaps that traditional government measures leave unaddressed. And this example from Hungary that we included here can be of interest. Then, last slide. Instead of conclusions or final remarks, two outstanding issues in which with which we are still debating, with we are still struggling. There is this tension. This came very clearly through on the first day of the forum on Monday. Like the international human rights perspective emphasizes this kind of the universality of rights. Everyone is entitled to those rights. But then we need to have a situated understanding of necessary energy services. So it is each community at whatever level that needs to define what energy is what energy is for, to define what necessary energy services are. But we think that this capabilities approach mentioned earlier is a way out of this sort of dilemma. So the scope of the toolkit, as I said, is primarily European, but grounded on this universal definition. And then should we talk about the right to energy that's it, or a right to clean energy. And we recognize that there is not any form of energy suitable or acceptable. So that's something we're still trying to figure out, how much to emphasize the clean energy in the toolkit. And this tension between environmental and social justice sort of objectives of the right to energy, dimensions of the right to energy. And of course, we also recognize the risk of co-optation, of capture of the right to energy discourses by, say, dirty fuel lobbies. And we've seen that, like the coal industries taking over energy poverty discourses to kind of protect and defend their interests. So with this, I thank you for your attention. And what I could do is perhaps, if there is, I haven't looked at the chat box. And I wonder if any of the contributors to the toolkit, especially Marlis, Marin, Merlin, or any of the other contributors would like to say something, or if otherwise you can, anyone would like to ask a question. Thanks, Marlis.
Hi, I will join you here because we did have some discussions on the chat, but actually we didn't have so many questions, it seems. We had an interesting discussion with Inigo, who was sharing some further examples of how there have been some situations wherein homeless persons or people squatting have been trying to get access to either water or to electricity, but were failing to do so, also through legal ways. But it wasn't necessarily on the point of the toolkit so far. So what we could maybe do is to see if anybody has a question, please drop a Q in the chat so we know that we can give you the floor to actually ask a question live. And otherwise, our plan was to do a final round of Miro boarding for the day with some brainstorming, because like Sergio explained, we have worked on this toolkit now with about 20 people, mostly within working group 3, and this is leading to a lot of interesting debates where we're sharing different views and different perspectives, including some unsolved issues. And I think we've also realized through the discussion so far of the past 4 days that there are many different views available, and that we also may be missing some things in the way that we are portraying the toolkit or the message that we want to get across. So the idea of this session very much was also to ask you for any additional insights or maybe lessons that you've drawn yourself from the last 4 days, because we are also sort of approaching the end of the forum. Tomorrow we will have another day which is about COVID-19 and energy services and the right to energy. But maybe this would be also a good moment to think about what we've learned from the past 4 days. Let me see, because in the meantime, there is actually also a question in the chat, Sergio. So before we do the brainstorm, maybe that's a good one to ask, but a very difficult one, because the question asked by Emma is, how do you think that a right to clean energy could be implemented?
Yeah, totally difficult to answer. I personally think my personal opinion is that the way energy is supplied, energy provision system, the logic of the whole energy provision system should change dramatically. So the farther we are from treating domestic energy as a commodity, the closer we will be to something resembling the right to energy actually fulfilled. Yeah, that would be my quick reaction. And I can see here that Carlos de los Riscos posed a question a bit further up on the chat box. So he's asking whether do you think that this minimum energy service level could be calculated considering different variables? I think these are heating degree days, cooling degree days, building efficiency. I'm not. I understand that theoretically you can do like wonderful calculations based on all sorts of available data, such as the ones you're saying. But and I'm sure that would be a very interesting and useful exercise. But what I would say perhaps is that there needs to be, because energy services are socially determined, other processes, such as this paper I've mentioned by Gordon Walker, in which there's a participatory process on what energy services are important and what level of energy services are important. That's based on focus groups, questionnaires, surveys. Those could be those are very important methodological approaches to reaching some sort of consensus on what the minimum energy service level could look like.
Yeah, maybe I can add there one of the interesting discussions that we had in the last round for the toolkit, and also on the what question. So what is the right to energy or energy services? We were starting to have a debate about, well, we were already questioning the ability or the appropriateness of finding some type of kilowatt hours or cubic meters of gas or whatever, like the sort of minimum amount of energy as the basis. So we started to think also about alternative ways of actually defining services. And there was this really interesting example from Ola Kobide where they, and if Inigo want to intervene and actually explain it in his own words, because he came up with this example, then it would be great, because I might not explain it exactly correctly. But the idea was that rather than providing people access to a minimum amount of gas for heating, they found a way to actually surface a building with a certain minimum amount of temperature level. So everybody would have free access to minimum 18 degrees of heating, and anything that they wanted to put higher in terms of heating, that they would have to pay themselves. So it would be a different way of sort of like not thinking about this in monetary terms or not thinking about this in kilowatt hours, but to thinking about it really in services. And I know that there are similar experiments out there for actually making sure that people have access to lighting. So having a scheme where people get access to light bulbs or get access to energy efficiency as a service. But I think we're still looking for good examples there. So if anybody has some ideas to share, that would be really great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Or shall we leave it here and let people, give people like, I don't know, 10 minutes, 7 minutes to work on
But there is, I guess, two ways of approaching it. Is we indeed take our discussions further to the bar, where we can further debate these ideas. Or we can do a final wrap-up. That was what we actually intended from the board. There's not so many comments there, but maybe we should do a quick round and maybe also share some of our own final thoughts, also as a way of sort of wrapping up and seeing where the toolkit is. The idea was that we have the four main editors of the toolkit here to sort of have a final last reflection. And I think Marilyn should be here to have a look at the whiteboard. There's not so many sticky notes there, but maybe you briefly want to share your thoughts, Marilyn.
Hi.
Hi.
I think I might have been the only one in that room.
So all the notes were yours.
No, there is a couple besides mine. So mine really comes from my background on that energy underpins everything society does. So we need a right to energy because it underpins society, and it upholding the other rights related to equality is not possible without energy. And then also it was, that was the two things that came out, really relation to deserving a decent life and the connection to other basic human rights. That's pretty much it.
Thanks, and I think somebody's showing the mirror board for us. I'm not sure who's sharing the screen, but I think we're looking at the many sticky notes from the previous session, not the sticky notes from the current session. Yeah, which are below. But I can summarize the what question, which is the one that I have been sort of coordinating also in the team. Again, not so many notes, but what I take away myself also from the entire forum is that there is a clear interest in exploring this idea of not maybe only affordable energy, but actually free energy, and whether that should be free for all or just for certain groups. I think this is something that we need to explore further for the toolkit and to also gather good examples on. And we had a great discussion on Tuesday about this, so I think it will be good to take forward best practices and to explore more there. One thing that we didn't discuss, I think, so much in the forum yet is opportunities for block tariffs. So having very sensitive block tariffs in terms of starting with a lower band of energy or a lower service level of energy that is really free, and then having some higher levels where people start to pay, but maybe only in a moderate sense. Also to take into account any type of environmental limits there. But I think this is something that we have to look into, and the understanding that energy services is a broad concept. So whatever type of necessary energy service we define, we need to define it in a broad way. For example, education is mentioned here as something that we don't often think about, but that is quite important. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Marlis. Just to talk about the who question, there was only one sticky note there, kind of emphasizing this idea that the vulnerable should be treated differently. And my concern there is that by doing that, to what extent treating them differently is in itself a problem. And this comes to Catherine's comment on the chat box. We're saying like, okay, this minimum energy service, but what? So the vulnerables are left in this sort of poverty charity. So they're entitled to this little bit of energy, which, however it is calculated, is what they deserve, and therefore the whole issue of stigmatization and all that. So this tension between treating some like the vulnerable differently and universality and stigmatization. I think what I'm saying is not very articulated, but I feel there's a tension there that is worth looking at. And perhaps Marin, you want to say something about the how?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm the last but not least. So please contribute to this part because the how is really about practical solution. However, I see from my report two very interesting comments that really put into perspective the fact that I mean it's also very in line with the previous session, but it really puts into perspective the fact that a right to energy is not an end per se, and it really has to be a part of a broader democratic system where everybody has a voice and has something to say about their experience, about what they have to, about the way they are energy citizens, actually. Another comment is actually super interesting. It puts a little bit more into perspective the fact that targeting the maybe the lobbying towards the right person in order to make that happen. And that also reflects on what Joanna said on Tuesday on the power of let's say community lobbying and citizen action. So those are definitely points that should definitely be taken into consideration. So please continue the discussion.
Thank you, Marlis, Merlin. I'm hoping that it was a good session for everyone and it was useful. If you have any ideas about the toolkit, please reach out to us. We're hoping that we'll finish this later in the spring. I haven't had the time to have a look at the graphic recording by Luisa. I will do later. I'm seeing lots of stuff showing up there, so I'm sure this will be also very useful for the sort of work we are doing with the toolkit. Actually, all this graphic recordings, that could be something that we could potentially use to illustrate the toolkit if that were possible. So I would leave it here because it's 6 p.m. Thanks so much on behalf of the whole team that has organized today's session. And I think there's the possibility to meet at the bar now.
Yeah, and maybe to remind everyone, so there is the opportunity as usual to go join us in the main bar where there is some music, but there's also 2 special tables reserved, like Raúl said in the beginning, where there is an opportunity to specifically talk further about issues related to Cańada Real, and the Green Deal. So there are different tables, different rooms that you can visit to try to meet people. So have a browse around, have a look around, and we'll hopefully see you there, or otherwise see you tomorrow for the last session. Bye.